Okay, so as we went from 1731, this is very big. So language in 1731 is very different to modern English. So in 1731, nouns would have been capitalized, which is actually similar to German. Words like carrots would not be made a proper noun in modern English, but in in 1731, it was used differently. We didn't have as much of a standardization when it came to capitalization, and so many nouns were just capitalized. And so um, something we would also see from texts that are older than, like, maybe in 1680 or so, we're going to see that sentences are longer. Um, and we'll see that the way that the typography, the graphology, the graphology of the text, that's where we're going to explore graphology. The graphology is very different because we're using different symbols for the same words. We had a broader range of symbols that we used in our writing. And so the printing press limitations forced us to change how we speak. And so that was one of the biggest points that technology impacted, or one of the earliest points where technology impacted how we write. Because we had to write in a way that was able to be replicated. If I am going to scan a picture today of my handwriting so that an AI can transcribe it, I need to make it legible enough for the AI to transcribe. And therefore, I am shaping my handwriting according to technology. I am using a hashtag for referencing things because I don't use that in a book. I don't need to reference hashtags in a book, but I reference it on a computer. And so I've got all of these things that I'm adding because of technology. So we are going to be required to explore how language has changed over time. And as we explore it, I want us to refer to the specific details from the text and our wider study of language change. So in studying language change, there are so many different sections that we need to be exploring. We need to understand the processes of language change and the actual historical events. And we need to understand what effect this had on language and what effect this had on the use of language. And we also need to understand how one word may have meant something 300 years ago that it doesn't mean today. Charity 300 years ago meant something different to charity today. Charity, a very well-known example that many know, is a quote by Jesus. He said, in this are summarized all the commandments, but the greatest of these is charity. Okay? And that's what it was in the King James Version. I've actually got a really old King James Version here, from like 1600s or 1700s. But that's what it was. But today, the way it's translated from Greek is the greatest of these is love. And the reason for the difference is not because the Greek was wrong or they were wrong in the translation, but contextually, the word charity meant one thing then, and it means a different thing now. And it means that because the words change, because words exist in a context. Words are impacted by the world they are in, by the paragraph they are in, by the sentence they are in. And so if I take a word out of context, I can interpret the same word in 100 different ways depending on the year. What is a meme 100 years ago? Meme. It's the sound a baby makes, maybe. What is neurolinguistic programming? It used to be a therapeutic technique. It still is a therapeutic technique, but now it is an AI training technique. What is a computer? How has that changed over time? Do you still see the calculator as a computer? Because it is. And so language needs to change. So just like Elvish, languages that naturally develop, languages need to naturally develop and change over many, many years. And so this leads us into, if it needs to change, where does it start? The age-old question, where did we come from? Except like language. So where does language come from? What do you think? Yeah, I would say that language is there because we have a need to communicate. How different would we be as humans if we were able to communicate telepathically? And if we were able to communicate telepathically, how would that impact our relationships? How would that impact how we function as a society? How would that impact how we function communally? Would we be able to, and also like if someone could read your thoughts without you having any power, and someone being able to read your thoughts on command, that would also play a role. Things like people with ADHD, people with, especially autistic people. Autistic people have a language problem, have language struggles, a communication struggle, because there are rules of communication that they're not quite understanding because of it's a developmental disability. Same with ADHD. I struggle with auditory processing, and people want to phone me all day, and I literally have to record the conversation, and then I have to take the conversation, transcribe the conversation. Otherwise, I have no recollection of the conversation because I cannot process orally. So at school, you can understand why school was a very self-studying thing for me. I studied on my own because I couldn't process what was happening in class. I had no idea what they were talking about. It's not that I didn't care. It was just like, I was making notes while the teacher was talking, and then she'd be like, don't make notes, listen to me. But if she was able to share her thoughts with me, then I'd be able to understand. And then on that thought experiment, if someone was able to share thoughts, what language would it be in? If I could share my thoughts with you, would they be in English, Afrikaans, Zulu, Xhosa, French? And that's another thing we're going to be exploring. What language happens inside our heads? And is communication only verbal? Does tone communicate? Do we need words to communicate? Is a punch also effective communication? If you touch me and I say no, and I punch you, it means the same thing. Just one is more socially acceptable. So I am communicating that I don't want you to touch me. If you touch me and I punch you, it's not that I'm refusing to communicate. It's just that you don't like my method of communication. And that brings us to the point of exploring, why do we communicate in the way we communicate? Do we communicate for ourselves, or do we communicate for the listener? Do we communicate to make sure the listener understands what we're saying, or do we communicate to make sure that we have expressed what we want to express? And can we do both? How is it that I can have a conversation with someone and with two people, one person totally understands me, the other does not? I'm using the same words, they have the same context. And the reason I believe is because we have different communication needs. And so because we all have different communication needs, we all have different shaped mouths, we have different ways of using our tongues, we have different things that we need to name. In a place with snow, we need to have 30 names for snow. But in South Africa, we've only got one name because I've only seen snow a couple of times in my life. However, the amount of names we have for pap, oh my gosh. So we have a need to have names for things in every culture and society. And so with that, with those needs to name those certain things, pap is I don't like pap, but it is a part of South African culture. Whether I like it or not, it is a part of our culture. And so the language surrounding it, if that were removed completely, I would lose my culture. If I were to be introduced to 30 different types of snow, but I've never seen snow in my life, I am having someone else's culture imposed on me. And so learning a language is contextual. And so language changes as it is needed. And so language did not just develop from nothing, it developed from a need to communicate. And so we made sounds, but we also made hand motions. You'll see Indian people have a way of moving their head, which communicates different thoughts. The Italians have a way of using their hands that describe different things. And they may not be consciously aware of it, but there is a subconscious communication happening. And so on this, how has our language changed by working online, by meeting our friends online? And how have different cultures, how have the different cultures had their languages change in different ways? So these are some curiosity questions for you. I hope it sparks some curiosity.